Thank you all for joining us this evening. I am Elizabeth East. I'm a director at LA Louver Gallery, and it's my privilege to introduce the speakers tonight. But first, a couple of housekeeping notes. First, to say that the gallery will be open for a brief time after the conversation. So if you haven't yet seen the exhibition, please do so afterwards and come back again. The show is up through May 11th. I also want to remind you to validate your parking, which is very important. It's time-based. If you are staying in the neighborhood, the garage opposite is open until 10:30. Please reclaim your car. This evening, the conversation will last for around 45 minutes, so there will be time for questions afterwards, so please hold on to any questions. And someone will be passing around a microphone. Also to say that we are recording this evening, and that copy will go on our website and will also be available on YouTube in due course. So, back to our speakers, and I will be brief, you'll be pleased to know. It's tough because they all have very distinguished and very rich backgrounds. Our first guest on my extreme right is Manuel Aguilar-Moreno. Manuel is an historian, teacher, and author whose research includes the pre-Columbian and colonial history and art of Latin America. He is a professor at California State University, Los Angeles, with his teaching focusing on the art and history of Mexico. Manuel was also a colleague of Luis Bermudez at the university and counted him as a close friend. Second, we have Karyn Craven, who is a Los Angeles-based artist and designer, as well as the director of the Luis Bermudez estate. She is the life partner of the artist. Karyn's work, together with that of Bermudez, is the basis of a forthcoming foundation dedicated to preserving Bermudez's legacy and giving back to the community of West Adams here in Los Angeles. They maintained a studio since 1984, I think, so very much ingrained into that part of Los Angeles. And finally, but hardly least, is our moderator, Diana Nawi. Diana was the Susan Brennan co-artistic director of the New Orleans citywide triennial Prospect 5, Yesterday We Said Tomorrow, and more recently was the curator of Between Us for the Olivia Foundation in Mexico City. She currently serves as a curatorial advisor for Powder Mountain in Utah, and alongside Pablo Jose Ramirez was the co-curator of Made in LA 2023 Acts of Living, which I hope most of you saw at the Hammer Museum. And of course, it was that exhibition that featured the work of Luis Bermudez. So we come full circle, and I'd like to ask you to join me in welcoming our guests.
I'm going to ask a set of questions to Manuel and Karyn, and I think I'll give a brief intro about, I was very honored when the gallery and Karyn asked me to be part of this panel because I didn't have the privilege of knowing Luis, but I encountered him through the work with Pablo Jose Ramirez, who is my co-curator on Made in LA. I got this kind of random call from a colleague to talk through some estate planning with a friend of theirs who was a colleague of hers. And I said, what's the artist's name? And I'm Googling the artist. And I said, this looks like what we've been thinking about. This is it. It was like that moment when you kind of don't know what you're looking for and you find it for the show, because I think Made in LA was very much this kind of intergenerational dialogue and thinking about, on the one hand, it's meant to show emerging artists, and on the other hand, it's meant to think about what it means to be an artist in Los Angeles and what it means to have a commitment, to your practice. And I think that, for me, when Pablo and I visited the studio, was so profound to see not only the work, the individual objects themselves, which, as you all have seen downstairs and know from your own lives, is amazing, but it was the breadth and depth that was in that studio at one time, to see what it means to dedicate one's life to one's work. And I feel like for us, Luis really embodied that idea in the exhibition. So we have a lot of ground to cover, I think. So because I want to talk a little bit about who Luis was as a person, as an artist, as a teacher, and also to talk a little bit about the work. So I'll ask you, Karyn, if you can tell us a little bit about Luis's early life and sort of how he became an artist. I always like to, it seems kind of facile, but I like to begin at the beginning. If, you know, don't...
That makes sense.
Yeah. And I'm always curious, I think there's this question for me of like, how does one decide to be an artist? I mean, sometimes it's vocational, it's like a calling, but it's a weird life. It's a precarious life. It's a unusual life. It's not on the checkbox for your majors in the same way that lawyer, doctor, accountant, clerk, etc. So I'm always really curious how somebody comes to that space. So I wonder if you could shed a little light on that and also talk about how you met Luis.
Okay, that's a big question, right?
Everything all at once.
Well, if you start at the beginning, Luis and I met in the late 70s in college in the art department. And how he came to his work and his life and his practice, I think he was born into it. Like, he truly lived the artist's way and the artist's life. That's the most, like, succinct way I can think to share that. And his early life, you know, he was very dedicated to his family and to his heritage. He spent a lot of time at his grandparents' ranch in rural Mexico. There he was very, very inspired by, or the memories and the time he spent there went on to fuel his work and really like laid the foundation for his further creative practice.
Okay, thank you for...
You're welcome.
Yeah, that was nice. We love brevity. Do you mind just a little bit more about like deciding to go to art school, or if you have any insight into those kinds of decisions? Like, you know, was there any other thing he considered doing, or?
Well, yeah. He did have a scholarship to be a pharmacist.
Okay.
Right, and of course that's like much more respected, highly paid, you know, everyone's dream, the parents' dream for their kid to be a doctor, right? And he just shared, I didn't know him then, but he shared that he just realized, like, I don't want to count pills all day. This isn't my life, my passion. You know, and even in his early years, like the stories I hear from his family and from him, he was the kid who was creating, stacking up the pillows, jumping off the roof, like always building, always researching, really had that spirit of creativity and discovery from what I can tell is like early on. And you kind of see that playfulness throughout his work, and especially in some of the titling of the work. You know, it's very, very, very much like that.
Yeah, yeah. It's nice to think about how, I mean, it's a cliche, but if you're, you know, everyone's an artist, you know, and this kind of idea that you might be born into it, but it's like who continues on that thread, like who's able to follow that through as a life path, I think. Yeah,
and I guess too, it's like that inner drive, you know, where you just can't say no.
Yeah.
It's what you do, you know.
Yeah. So, Manuel, your relationship with Luis was in the context of teaching and curating, and I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, I mean, you had a collegial relationship, a kind of intellectual relationship, and a friendship. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about meeting him and those initial ideas that kind of attracted you to one another, like where those resonances were within your scholarship and his work.
Thank you. First of all, I feel very honored to be here with all of you. I want to thank Karyn and Elizabeth for inviting me to this conversation here. And it's a pleasure also to be in this conversation led by Diana Nawi and with our technical assistant here mimicking with the computer things that sometimes we don't see those things, but if those things fail, then we will notice that something. You know, so, okay. Well, I met Luis Bermudez 20 years ago when he came to teach in our university in Cal State LA. And he didn't know anybody, so we had a department, and we have some colleagues here that will tell me that was somewhat dysfunctional in the sense that everybody did their own things, and sometimes people passed next to you and didn't even say hi because they were so absorbed in their own things. So then Luis was like, to whom I ask something here? So, but because the Mexican background of both of us, it was very easy that we connected immediately. So the very first week that he was there, we began to chat and establish a connection. And it called my attention that he was born in the U.S., but from a Mexican family, and he was always he had the passion to connect with his own background. That is something that doesn't happen to anybody. Sometimes you create your new life here. Sometimes you disconnect somewhat to what you left or your memories of your history, you know. And it called my attention that he was very much involved in to know who he was. No? It was a kind of a search for identity kind of idea for him. And we had an opportunity to chat a lot. Sometimes we stay hours in our offices chatting and trying to know each other better. Also, I realized he came from the experience of having teaching in UCLA and a great training as a ceramic artist. So technically he was superb, but it took him a while to adapt to the needs of our students, no? Because the students of Cal State are very different to the ones from UCLA. No? So it's a very diverse type of students with different backgrounds. So but he had in his own search for his identity and being part of the diversity, you know, of the experience of immigration, he had all those abilities to connect to the heart of the students. No? So to me, he was a great teacher because he had the passion to teach and to share to the students what art was. And as Karyn just said, he was born into art. No? It's something that he had in his own blood. So to me, it was very impressive to see a guy who was very committed. He was putting the double of time that normally a professor would put there. He renovated all the equipment that was there, was very neglected. So he raised money to get new kilns. And so it was an amazing work. And I would imagine that some of his students may be here, but I talking to the students, they said that he was strict with them, but because he wanted them to grow and to be better artists. And to me, that's something that touched my heart always. And I admire of Luis as someone who was a people's person, and especially students, because besides his own practice, he put a lot of his time and effort and dedication to make our ceramics department to be a better place. And I can see the students that he how we can say the word, he mentored, you know? The students he mentored, they grew in a tremendous way because many of those students were my students also. So I saw their growth as persons, as an artist. So I was close. I visited Luis in the ceramic department many times, and he was telling me techniques about ceramics and things like that. And we had the opportunity to go together to the studios of some artists of Los Angeles to talk about art. So for me, it was a lot of learning from Luis to me. And we had the chance to exchange ideas. He was very much into the Mesoamerican past of Mexico. No? That is something that touches the roots of all the Mexicans, especially Luis, as Karyn mentioned, that he had a strong attachment to the land of his ancestors, to that ranch in Jesus Maria, Jalisco, where all his roots and his connection was. And he had that kind of strange obsession to know who he was. where he was coming from, and how he called them genetic memories. No? He used that concept a lot. He felt that his art represents the genetic memories he gets from his homeland, from his ancestral land, better to say.
That is great. I mean, I'm really struck. Like I said, I didn't meet Luis, but I ran into Stephen Simon, who's here, who ran the ceramics lab at UCLA for many years when I was a student, one of like probably hundreds of, but I remember, Stephen does not remember me, I was very bad at ceramics, but I remembered him very much, and it's like nice to know that I was in this lineage of Luis in art school in Southern California, which has this incredible tradition of really people, makers and true artists teaching, right? They're not at odds with each other. So I really, it tracks with this region, but it's really amazing to kind of hear his dedication to that.
I can add to that too. That was hugely important to Luis. Like, he cherished his relationships with his mentors, and for him to bring that forward, he was extremely, extremely dedicated to that, to the knowledge and the education. It wasn't just about clocking in, clocking out. The level of commitment to teaching and to the lineage was outstanding.
Yeah. I wonder, we've kind of glossed this maybe central fact, but that ceramics was the medium of choice, that clay and working in this way was sort of where Luis landed. And I'm sort of curious about that decision, that choice, what informed that. And I think there's very much these sets of, it's a very evolving and vast practice, but on the other hand, there are very clear through lines and kind of iconographies and signature materials and shapes that recur throughout the practice. I think you could kind of point to that in the exhibition, but in the studio as well, just across bodies of work. So I wonder if each of you might talk a little bit about how you think about how Luis, his sort of, for lack of a better word, like signature style, like what does it mean to this Luis Bermudez like relationship to the medium and to the form?
I think what really is the bottom, like let's say the trend or the through line, is really the concept of the work, and he has major themes, let's say, but his inspiration from the natural world, from spirituality, from the human condition, for that wanting to know that you were talking about earlier, and from mysticism as well. And so exploration of all those ideas married with his passion for his own ancestry and his own way, I think is what fed those. And I feel like when I met Luis, he was already deep in clay. Like that was that, there was nothing else, and that was, he's pretty young at that point too. So I think it found him. Again, just much like that creative path, he did drawings, like working out sculptures, working out bigger ideas. But I think there was something about the clay, the earth, the process, the science, the transformation. And that thought of transformation is another thread that runs throughout all his work. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think I'm always struck by this relationship that we've talked a little bit about, but like earth, clay, what it means. There's a lot of topography and geology that shows up represented in the work, and so thinking about that kind of metaphorical relationship, but also thinking about the expanse of ceramics and how he thought about that, right? Like when we were speaking about the cenotes, that they have these, sake bottle forms, right? So he's pulling, from Japanese culture, he's pulling from the earth, he's pulling from geology, he's pulling from Mesoamerican culture. So to think about also the history of ceramics, right? It's vessels and it's altars and it's objects in this kind of way. So thinking a little bit also about those ideas.
Yes, I would say that making ceramics is really an act of creation. Like we know from the stories of the Bible and other cultures that speak about God or the gods creating human beings out of the clay, out of the ground, and modeling that clay or that dirt to create the human beings. No? And at the same time, we have, and that happens in many, many different cultures. So when the Mayas, for example, they believed that the human beings were made out of the earth, but from the corn that comes out, the maize, the corn that comes out of the earth, and then our body and blood is made out of corn. Like in other traditions, we are made out of a clay that gives us life. So then for a ceramist, I always see Luis like that. He was a creator. He was out of the same earth that where he comes from. He is creating something. Is like expanding the work of the Mother Earth into producing things for not only for the enjoyment of we the viewers, but also is to reflect. His work is a reflection and a contemplation of history, identity, the past, the ancestors. And to me, I would define his ceramic sculpture as the bridge that he wanted to do between the ancient and the contemporary through the landscape and symbolism. So you will see as you walk in the exhibition, or you will see it after the talk, after this conversation, you could see that some of the patterns that are very present there is landscape and symbolism. And that is something that goes very much in hand with the pre-Columbian philosophies, the pre-Columbian ways of thinking, where the earth is the mother of everything, and the clay is an emanation of the earth, we can say. No? And that same Mother Earth produces the water that comes from the water springs, no? And produces rivers, lakes. And he has a lot of that in his work. He puts those cenotes that are those subterranean waters from Yucatan. And that you need to approach it to get it. No? That's why you can see that there is a figure in a kind of a bottle figure, as he called them, that is always next to the border of a cenote with the risk of falling down. And at the same time, there was the custom that in the cenotes, these subterranean sinkholes, the Mayas, for example, throw virgin girls as an offering to get more water, to get more from the earth. No? But if you notice through the works of Luis, some of them that are here and some of those are not here in this exhibition, but as he historically moves in his style of working, the earliest works always have this bottle figure appearing next to a cenote. But after a time in his work, that figure disappears, and then it appears the deserted cenote by itself, where you see the sinkhole and then the water underneath. And the reason of that is because he wants the public, the viewers like us, to come and see by ourselves. There is no need to have that other external figure. We are that figure now. We are the people that we are going into that world and get immersed in that world. And I think was very much the way I could see Luis' philosophy in life. Without trying to take too much of the word myself, but I will just define three facets or three periods or steps in Luis's work. He has some themes in which he treats the sacred or special places on earth. Like the series of cenotes is part of that. It's not the only part, but it's part of that. Because he treats the landscape and the symbolism of the landscape in many other ways, not only the cenotes. Second, he is very interested about the symbolic power of the serpent, of the snake, the serpent. The serpent, according to the pre-Columbian people, is a symbol of moving water, because when the water moves, it's like a snake that moves that way. No? Also is a symbol of fertility, the snakes. You see, there is an image that Luis put attention to it, and we have it here in an annex here of the museum. That is the image of the Coatlicue. The image of Coatlicue, we have it here. This image is a representation of the earth with a serpentine face. So the serpents, just can imagine, these are transformative beings, you know. When it is dry season, they become yellowish or brown. When it is rainy season, they become green. So they transform according to the changes of life. And they become the skin of the earth. So that's why the vegetation was represented with snakes themselves. And Luis loved to use that representation about his attachment to the land, to the earth, the connection with these values. And so he produced at some point in his career, and you will remember this, Karyn, this kind of snakes that are moving like with a kind of an anxiety, no?
Yes.
And he called them like anxious snakes or something like that. No, so that's like this. Well, it is part. The snakes in this context that we are talking about represents the kind of a horriness to live, no, to move, to live, to cover the earth, and so water, fertility, vegetation, and also they have a phallic symbol. So they are images, metaphors of sexuality in many ways. So in the Christian philosophy, for example, the snakes have a negative connotation, because the snake was the one that was in the tree forbidden in the paradise, no? That was the devil that produced the fall of the human beings. So in our Christian Western philosophy, the snake was a negative being, but for the pre-Columbian, it was a positive being, even though they bite and they can give you trouble and things like that. But at the same time, they represent this beauty of life and this livelihood of the earth, no? And the third type of topics, of themes that Luis uses is the issues of identity. For example, when in the exhibition here, there is a snake with the open mouth and the face of Luis is coming out. Okay, probably you saw it. You were taking pictures of that when we were in the room there together. So that is something that probably we can talk about that later in our conversation. But this represents a lot about his internal dynamics that Luis had, no? But these are basically, just to summarize, the sacred places, the symbolic power of the serpents, and the issues of identity. Those are the characteristics I see more in his work, you know?
That was so illuminating. Thank you for that.
You did your
it's so
homework.
helpful. I feel like I learned a lot. I'm struck. I was thinking about. I kind of mentioned Luis's place in Made in LA, but I think one of the things that you said that resonated so much for me, and I would say for Pablo, is, in the canonical Western art history, there's this rupture, and then we did modernism, and we moved on, right? There's this kind of idea that then we've advanced and there's progress. And this idea that in other traditions and other ways of thinking about art making and culture and creative practice, that the ancient and the contemporary are not at odds, and in fact have this totally fluid, sometimes circular relationship. And I think you see that entirely out of anyone who's thinking about non-Western art history, that becomes part of it. And I feel like for so many artists in Made in LA, the babies all the way up, it was very much, it's like, I think of it, modernism is just one tool, one vocabulary. And this ancient vocabulary and this history of tradition and this relationship to craft and this, often matriarchal, patriarchal history of form, image, making, all of that, I think is so, we're in this kind of new moment where we can kind of acknowledge that other time, space kind of relationship and how that comes out in art. I'm really struck by that, hearing you speak. And in particular, that relationship to the landscape, right? Which is always now, always ancient. It's kind of, I think, really shows up in that work. The other thing I kind of wanted to come back to, Karyn, is when I when I go talk to students, like art students a lot, I think there's a lot to be learned from going to art school as a human being, whatever your path is. But I think if you, as I said, if you choose the path of an artist, you could choose to have a very beautiful but very precarious life, or if it chooses you. But I think, the thing about it is you have to get yourself out of bed. You do not typically clock in to be an artist, right? That's not the deal. You got to get yourself out and do it. And you have to, as you said, commit, really believe in it. And so I think a lot about Luis's work and that encounter with the studio and seeing what was so obviously a kind of dedicated practice. And you could see the time and the regularity built into those objects and into the way the studio was formatted, into the seriality of the works. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just what that studio practice looked like and what day-to-day looked like for him as an artist.
I think the word that really resonates is commitment. And again, too, it's that thing where it's in you. Like there's no choice. You're going to do your work. You're going to do it seriously. You're going to do it with dedication, with authenticity, with respect. And that really was Luis, from really when we were so young, when we first met, he was always, always like that. And that commitment, when you think about day to day, for him, like living was art. And the way he did everything was with that same dedication, whether it was making guacamole for our friends, barbecuing, drinking tequila, like all of it, right?
He knew how to do it well.
Right, and it's like you see that throughout, and I feel if you are going to take the artist path, that's mandatory. Because there's no free lunch, like you said. You don't clock in. Like no one's got your back, besides your community and your friends and your family, and that's something that really how Luis was.
That sort of segues into the title of the show. I wonder if you can talk Sobre la Vida, like a little bit about your choice of that and gallery, kind of what you were thinking, because that feels like it really embodies some of what you're saying.
I'd be happy to speak on that. And it's kind of funny because once, the gallery committed and to do the big installation, that was a huge commitment, which we are, really grateful for, because it's really a pleasure to see that architectural piece installed. And it's been decades since it's, found the public eye again. And Sobre la Vida is the title of that installation. And then when you think about it, all of Luis's work, in hindsight, like you don't realize it when you're living it decade to decade, but after the fact, it's like all of it is about life. Whether it's the early work, the treaty stones, the holding vessels, the vortex, the moksha, the kahas that speak to funerary vessels, the passing of life, and on to myth, place, and identity, and forward to the series that you touched on. So it all kind of came full circle to that being the title, and that felt really right.
Do you want to add anything?
Well, yes, we can say that following what Karyn was saying, this is this exhibition, the Sobre la Vida, about life, is like a kind of a metaphor of Luis's life, no? Because represents, he was a person who lived with intensity, with passion, feeling every moment, and that's what his students got, no? So to inspire someone to put the best in them, commitment, as Karyn was saying. So he was a very professional and intense individual as a person and as a teacher, no? So then I think it is a kind of I would call it like that. It's a kind of a memorialization of his own life, no? You chose the right way to put this, because I see this exhibition and this talk as a memorial to Luis. No? We are trying to go into his genetic memory, no? The best way we can, so to try to understand. And through his works, we can understand himself, because these works are a kind of an autobiographic a kind of a path, no? Is the autobiographic path of Luis. Though.
Something I'd like to add to that, something that was really extremely important to Luis, he really felt that it was the experience of the viewer seeing the work that really brought it home. Like, he did the work, the viewer came to it, and it was the together, the sharing and the experience. And I think that level of experience is that other thought about life that flows through all of it.
Yeah, there's a nice quote from him around that he's channeling the intensity of experiences, significant encounters in his life into the work, and that I think very much in the form of landscape, or very much that encounter, he is creating that for the viewer. That's sort of, it's a mode of in communicating this through experience, I think, with one's, the way one feels the objects.
It's also to a really like generosity of spirit. I think that's kind of like what resonates throughout all of it, through his creative practice and through his teaching as well.
One thing that I think, came up through the project I was working on, and I think you just alluded to, like having not seen the architectural installation in a while, and I think, Luis was under-recognized in his life. And so I wonder, what is it, why was that? What is your kind of thoughts on that? And what does it mean for recognition now, and what has shifted in the cultural paradigm to allow for that, or to think about that differently?
Well, times are really different, number one, and it's hard with Luis because his work, in a weird way, like in certain circles, the material itself was marginalized or ghettoized, right? And then it was almost like there wasn't a box to fit in. In the ceramic world, it wasn't ware. In the sculpture world, well, it was clay-based. So you're kind of like, where's your box? That was number one, I think. And number two, the interest was in a different place. The community, the bigger picture of like how society was moving, especially the art community at that time. So I think it's that, and it's tough too, because in a weird way, like if no one's paying attention, it doesn't devalue the work. It's almost like Luis was just so committed; he just did it. Yeah.
Adding to this. Well, we need to consider that Luis he lived like two lives in one. No? Like, first of all, being a teacher is like to be a teacher is a vocation. No? It's a mission that you follow. And not everybody has that vocation. And the people who have it sometimes may not be well understood by the rest of the people, because we say, why you work 20 hours a day if they are only paying you 7? No? Well, because we don't do it for the money. We do it for the passion of creating, sharing, trying to make your students to be even better than you, eventually, and to teach the way, because Luis's art is very reflective. It's a very philosophical art. An art that is a kind of an introspective art that talks about his own reflections and struggles of defining himself, to trying to find his identity in the broader sense, and to resolve the internal issues that we all humans have, but he was preoccupied about that. So I think the fact that he was a real teacher, that he put a lot of time into teaching and into try to get disciples that require all your time, that was a time that was not put into his particular concrete practice, even though we can see that his practice produced a lot of work. And also, I think Luis had, in his own self-definition, he was not a commercial artist. He was someone who did art because the passion of doing art, because it was meaningful for him. And So he was not promoting excessively his art. No? He was not trying to sell it. It was producing the art as an act of creation was something that satisfied him. And he was happy in doing that. So the extension of that, when you sell a piece and you see a piece of yours in a museum, that was kind of an extra follow-up of that. But I have that impression always that he did art for himself, from his own reflections and his own philosophy of life, and sharing that with the students and with the community was something that, of course, occupied himself. Committed his time into those kind of things. No, that's a kind of a view I have.
So I think we're towards the end, but I wonder. I'm really curious about this moment and what that means for you to see Luis's work receive this attention, and what you think his legacy is, which I think we've touched on, but also what you want it to be, right? Like, I think the gallery, each of you are stewarding this legacy, and what does that look like for you, and what are your hopes for that?
That's another big question.
Yes.
Thank you, Diana.
We will keep us 2 more hours here.
Yeah, right. Well, I feel like this is just the beginning, really, and we're thrilled to have the opportunity to have the show here at LA Louver. We're very grateful for Ben Jackal for introducing us to the gallery and for the Made in LA exhibition, which was stunning. And really, where we are now is carrying forward. But really, Luis did the work, not just as far as creating the works of art, but also for who he was and is, and who he continues to be through all those that he touched. And that is sort of why, that's how it came to be that we decided to do the give back with our Adams studio and, give it back to the community. Because really, art gave us everything in our life. We met in art school. It was through the practice of art that we lived. And we really see that as a way, not to get to whatever, but really it'll help heal the world, if more people can have that opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And I would just would say that we would like as persons who were close to Luis, that you could, when you visit the exhibition, or if you have visited already, or you are going to see it, to see in this the work of a person who is represented by his work, who is embedded in his work, is his inner self is a metaphor of this work, and you will see through the different forms and textures and water and clay and those elements, to see a person who is asking fundamental questions, about who I am. I am part of this earth. I am a part of this material that I am creating forms and expressing what I think about life, what I think about the world, how I see myself in this. So it's an existential type of work. It's a reflective work that plays with the mystery, plays with the unknown, plays with the landscape and symbols. Everything is symbolic in Luis's work. And Luis himself was very symbolic. When he didn't need to tell you a lot of things just with a look or just with certain kind of indications. You can get what he was saying, what he wanted. So then, to me, was as a friend, as a colleague that worked with him, I really appreciate a lot this effort that Karyn and all the people you are getting around to promote the work of Luis, because it really deserves to be promoted, this work, as you could see it. It's a work that has meaning, makes sense. And this is something important to add here. When you find an art that is inspired in something of the past, there may be people who have the temptation to think that the artist is appropriating something of the past or is in some way copying or something. No. As an expert myself in pre-Columbian art, I can tell you there is inspiration in that art, but never a copy, never an appropriation. It's an inspiration because he's connecting with that art and he is internalizing himself that art. But that art, as pre-Columbian as it can be in its origin, is very modern, very contemporary at the same time. And these kind of ideas of these whirlpools of pieces that we have there, no? That these kind of spirals that go into the infinitum of the earth, no? And this kind of, they talk about life and death because earth is a being that produces life and death. We are born from the earth. Nature is born from the earth. But when we die, where we go? We go back to the earth. So we return to the womb of the earth. And this kind of spirals that you see in Luis's work is that idea that we will someday, we will come back to the womb of the earth, where we came from. And I think when we can see this, the work of Luis and enjoy it as a kind of communication, a kind of an experience that the artist is trying to share, we will enter into amazing experiences ourselves, and we will get so many things that we don't imagine that will make us a more grown persons in many aspects. No? So I would define it as an internal, existential, and philosophical work, no? That represents the biography of a person through symbols, I would put it that way. And I don't know if this is the last question. Yeah. If this is the last question, I would like to close with, I had a chance to work with Luis in co-curating one exhibition a long time ago that was called Nepantla Dreams, Calmex State LA. And we featured the work Cal State LA, one of the areas that is strong in our university is the production of artists, precisely. So this exhibition was, we were thinking about it with the idea to promote the work of our former students. So you could see a plenty of work from ceramics, sculptures, paintings, crafts, many different things. And all the great artists that are very well known in their own that participated here, it was really a great experience to do it with Luis because when we put the name Nepantla Dreams, Nepantla means in Nahuatl language, the language of the Aztecs, means to be in the middle, no? So basically, 100% of these former students are Mexican American, no? Who are people that we call Nepantla people because they are in the middle of two cultures, but they have a statement to say. They have something to say that is strong, and it was very successful to have back all those amazing artists. I can mention a few names like Gronk, Carlos Almaraz, Frank Romero, and many other, Martin Garcia, who makes amazing wooden sculpture. So, and we did it together with the support of the Consulate of Mexico in Los Angeles, and it was a juried exhibition. And what created a little bit of trouble to us was the second part of the name. The Nepantla Dreams is very clear what we meant with that. But when we put Calmex State LA, Cal State LA means, what? Why are you putting the name Mex in between our name? You are bastardizing our name and things like that. Well, look at the last names of these artists. They are all Calmex artists. Okay, you see it that way, it's fine. And we got it, it's here. But amazing. I would also close I wouldn't like to close because it's always so pleasant to talk about Luis and his work. But he asked me to write an article for one of his catalogs of an exhibition called Luis Bermudez, Myth, Place, and Identity. And I close my article with the following reflection, and I am going to quote. From our journey through Luis Bermudez ceramic sculptures, we come to appreciate how his work is rooted and inspired by Mesoamerican art and ideas. His art is original, although it's clear that ancient Mexico is ingrained in his blood, genetics, and ultimately his vision. It is a work charged with vitality and nostalgia that connects the viewer with a mysterious and ancestral world. And I insist, and I close with this saying, that it is inspired in an ancient vision of the world, in an ancient art, Luis Bermudez art, but at the same time, it's a very, very contemporary type of work. It talks to all people who live in this present, but wants to take us to see life within a mystery and within a reflection. Okay.
Thank you for that.
Well done, Manuel.
That was really... I think we have a few minutes for some questions from the audience for anybody who has questions. Yeah.
I'll ask a question.
Yeah.
There's a lot of negative space.
Sorry, can you hold on just a moment?
Oh, there it is. There's a lot of negative space in his sculpture. And I was just viewing a photo of him, not that one, but he was standing on a landscape, and there was a sort of hole in front of him, and behind him there were negative spaces. There it is, negative spaces. And I'm wondering, that's probably, in my view, an inspiration, but if you can lend more light to that, I'd love to hear it.
I can speak to that. Since I took the photo.
The best source.
Right. No, really, I really love that photo. And it's funny that you really tuned into the negative space, because that is something, another facet that Luis always addressed, the positive, the negative, the duality. It's what you don't see that gives things the power, right? And he was deeply inspired by the natural world, as you can see there. And so that's it.
Where is that?
It's Canyons in the Sky outside of Moab in Utah. Yeah.
So you
had but I wanted to ask you if you could say a little bit more about the process of his work and the materials he used, because what's so striking is the texture and the colors, and I wonder what the castable refractory really means. Is that his invention?
I would say yes. He pioneered that clay body, and it's somewhere between, I would say, clay and cement. So it's very unique. It's very dense. It takes its own way of working. Often there would be molds, or a form made, a mold made from that, then another mold made, very often, many times back and forth, positive, negative. And then the various surfaces were sculpted in different techniques, sometimes with a tool, sometimes by hand, sometimes waiting till the material got to just the right consistency so it would retain some of the nuances in the shape. And then same for the color. That was another thing that was very scientific. It's probably where the pharmacy thing came in, right? And it's like, often he would fire things many times. And every time he went back into the kiln, it was a little bit of a gamble. Like,
glaze is very...
Right? Is it going to get better? Is it going to go the other way? Is it going to blow up, right? So, yeah. Does that answer the question? Yeah.
Yeah, I will just add, I think Karyn explained it very, very well. it is a kind of mixed media, we can say, in which you have you can see the crafts work of Luis, in the sense that his work is all about mixing materials, textures. Texture is very important, as you can see. Texture is everything in his work, and most of this texture was given by hand, by very delicate type of chisels and elements, or even brushes. So then he's trying to replicate that world, that landscape, that place that surrounds us to work like that. And if you see the image of the photo that Karyn took of Luis in the landscape, you can see there are parts of the landscape that go into the underworld, go into the cleavage in the earth. Another part that protrudes, So that is he's needing, or he's wanting to do all that, apply into his own techniques, So I think Luis is a combination of this refractory technique that is very unique, very powerful. Also the textures, colors, and with those elements he needs to convince the viewer that this is real. This is a real. We live in a real world that is represented by his work. So
I want to just add to that too. Quite often it was very physical, and very, very challenging. And there was a lot of kind of technical virtuosity that's behind the work that you don't see it, but that's what makes the magic.
Yeah. No, to your point, it's like hard to remember when ceramics was not allowed. It was like this taboo thing, because it's like been amazing in the last, 10 years in LA. I mean, LA has such an incredible history of ceramics, and such incredible artists have come out of here. And I think also there's a whole other conversation around Luis's work within that kind of larger formal conversation and technical conversation. Because I was really struck. I was thinking about Ron Nagel when I saw the works, and these plays with scale where something very large is depicted very small, and then these moments of texture, and I mean the virtuosity of glaze, which often just looks brown no matter what. It's a really, I think it's quite astounding what he was able to accomplish and achieve with the details of those works.
yeah.
Yeah.
You have another question?
Yeah, I do, actually. I thought what I was so struck by was the innovation, the seminal innovation of him using metalwork with ceramics and exploring space and landscape with metalwork. And I think this is probably one of the greatest innovations since Vogus in the 60s. So I'm curious where that came about. Clearly there's a Mexican tradition in metalwork, and I guess he was playing on that, but he took it to unusual explorations, and I just wondered what inspired it.
I think it was part of the natural evolution of his work. It's funny that you mentioned Volkos, because that was someone who, I would say, like Luis is like in that lineage with work that's extremely physical. And I feel like the use of the metal, especially in the context of the Sobre la Vida, the expanded metal, where it's almost like a ghost-like form, but it's supporting something that's extremely heavy. And again, it's that duality of contrast, like what you think something is, what it's not. In the figure, El Pasado, that stands outside the Sobre la Vida, you have the heavy head that's supported by almost nothing. And so that speaks to so many of those ideas that we've touched on about life, your own view of life, your place in the world, and all that.
Thank you guys so much for being here.
Yeah. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
see you.
Maestro, nice to see you.